11 personnel, 12 personnel, slot targets, deep targets. Wide receivers are more important to fantasy rosters than they've ever been. We're going to look at some tricky target totem poles and tell you where to attack. Let's get it. What's up, fantasy people? The True North Fantasy Pod is back. I am Trav, hostin' and West Coastin', and of course we are here to inform, empower, and entertain you towards making sound fantasy decisions. My co-host, as always, running pure, the stallion Frank Amaranti. How you doing today, Frank? Excited to get into another episode of the True North Pod with you, man.
Oh, I'm always doing good when I have a chance to talk shop, talk football with you. Today we're hitting up the receivers. It's great to look at ambiguous receiving rooms because that's where you could find value in your leagues and get a profit on, undervalued players or finding out which receivers, you'd want to stay clear of. So it'll be interesting to discuss this today.
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of ambiguous wide receiver rooms. We did have to whittle it down for the episode. Obviously, Frank, we don't have all day for an episode, but I think we've got some fun ones to unpack. A little rapid fire section at the end, much like we did last week, which I think has got some interesting topics in it as well. But of course, for any listeners right now, make sure you subscribe on that YouTube channel, hit the like button, leave us a comment to show some love. We really like seeing those comments on there, seeing that you're taking in it in the content. Always open to feedback as well. And of course, our social media info and all that jazz can be found in the episode description. But without further ado, Frank, let's get into some of these wide receiver rooms. Because like I said, wide receiver is getting very prominent in the fantasy landscape. Last week, we spoke about running back. And I mentioned that for me, it's probably still the sexiest position in fantasy football. But wide receiver is the most abundant. And we have to start 3 on a lot of our rosters now. We see them going ahead of these running backs in the early rounds of both season long and startup drafts. So really important to break them down. And I think some of these teams can offer some hidden value for us fantasy gamers. We're going to start in Indy. We're going to go to the Colts. Maybe start with one of the more messy, ambiguous situations for us to unpack here. This wide receiver room is plentiful with Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, Adonai Mitchell. And we have to, of course, factor in that they may have an alpha tight end putting a dent in that target pie as well. So Frank, I think the first place that I want to start is with Michael Pittman and talk about whether he's still the alpha, because if we look at his last couple seasons, last year especially, he seemed like his ceiling has fallen out. Just over 10 PPR points per game and only 3 weeks of 15 plus in 2024. 1 over 20, which isn't what you like for a guy who you were drafting as maybe a fringe wide receiver 1 in some spots after the season he had previous. He had over 15 points 9 times in that previous season that I mentioned. So just like a lot of things didn't go his way. Obviously, the quarterback situation was not good at all. Oddly enough, though, Frank, the catchable target percentage was higher in 2024 than it was 2021. So as you can see, I did a little bit of digging on Michael Pittman here, but I'm curious as to what you think. Can he bounce back from that to show maybe that 2023 form that we saw, or is it like a little bit sunk for us to expect that from him?
I think Michael Pittman can bounce back, but not to the level that he showed in 2024. Remember, he got to play with Joe Flacco. Pittman did that year, more of a obviously statuesque pocket passer. Now he's going to be playing with Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. They have more read option. They run the ball more. They're not volume passers by any means. So I don't see a path for Pittman to get to that, 2023 level, but he can still provide value. Pittman can, where he goes in drafts, being taken outside the top 50 on underdog. He can definitely give you some profit there. Remember, Pittman played through a back injury last year, which of course could linger and it could come back. It may never go away, but from what I've read, Pittman is feeling a little healthier this time around. So that can obviously help Pittman's production this season. I think the way you can look at it for Pittman is just a nice value where he goes, but don't expect like you're going to hit a home run with this. Maybe just a nice single liner over the second baseman's head to get to first on a good exit velocity. Just basically a solid pick to round out your roster. Even if it's best ball, even though you're not going to see huge spike weeks probably from Pittman, just having that steady contributor to help you out on weeks where maybe you have a few receivers on a bye, just someone to help you stay afloat. I think Pittman can do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And I like baseball too, Frank. So where like your Malik Neighbors, your Jamar Chases are knocking balls out of the park on a weekly basis. You got your Michael Pittman who's hitting singles into the or over the second baseman over shortstop, who is good as a wide receiver 3, maybe a flex play. Probably like him more as a flex play, I would say, than that wide receiver 3. But I think there's still a bunch of talent there, and there are some alpha traits in Michael Pittman. So at that value, like you said, I'm willing to take him on his ability to maybe give you an ROI on that pick, right? And maybe you get a wide receiver 3, but if you're going in expecting maybe a flex play, someone who you're going to be switching in and out on your bench, then I think you can be happy with that. The back injury is such a good call because I looked and he only missed 1 game because of it, but he was on 11 injury reports because of that back injury, Frank, which just means that he was dogging through it all season long, which probably had a bit of an impact on what happened with him there. So I think that's a good take on Michael Pittman. I still believe in the talent. And it's funny because I've kind of been a bit of a pendulum on him. I didn't really believe too much coming in, but then he showed me some good things and I bought in last year. Burned me a little bit, but at the price he's going right now, I think it's kind of a no-brainer with his profile in that offense.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking at the next guy in the pecking order, well, probably not the next guy in the pecking order because he got a bunch of targets, would be Josh Downs. And I want to talk about what the ceiling is for this guy because I was stoked about him coming in. I thought he was going to be a really versatile yards after the catch weapon, which he has been to an extent. But I think what the output of that has been kind of a low ceiling slot only player. 95 targets as a rookie, 104 targets in his second season, 803 yards is his max so far, 2 touchdowns as a rookie, 5 in his sophomore year. But I don't really project him to be a big touchdown scorer with that slot usage that he gets. So expectations, I think, need to shift with this information. I feel like his upside is very low, but I'm curious if you might have a counterpoint to that, Frank, because as a Josh Downs holder in a bunch of places, I would love to be convinced otherwise.
Yeah, not to say that Josh Downs has huge upside, but maybe he has a bit more upside than Pittman, whereas Pittman feels safer and more likely to give you ROI. Like Downs, 803 yards in only 14 games. He's had a few big plays. And, with that more read option type of quarterback with Richardson and slash Jones, he could be that quick read and then make plays after the catch. Um, I honestly am in on both of these receivers just because they're outside the top 50 receivers in ADP, Downs and Pittman. And I do believe, like we said in an earlier episode, that Daniel Jones will win the starting quarterback job. And Jones, despite his flaws, you can legitimately say that Jones is a better passer than A-Rich, which would help the receivers. So this is definitely the Colts receiver room I like to be targeting just for a single on Pittman and maybe a
Mhm.
chance at a double on Downs. None of these will get to top 12 production, but they'll help out your roster, and I like looking at them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, I was looking into some down stuff because the guys on the other show that I do, Dynasty Underground, have dogged me a little bit for my Jayden Reed love, talking about how he doesn't get on the field in 3 wide receiver sets. And so I did a little bit of digging on him. It's true. It's also true for Josh Downs, Frank. Last season, 2024, he saw 8 routes from 12 personnel. So 2 wide receiver sets, 2 tight ends, and only 5 targets from those. And if you combine the pass attempts of Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco in those formations, they threw the 11th most attempts from those formations. So I think his size and maybe inability to win on the outside does limit him a little bit, but at the same time, you're bagging 100 targets, you have some use in fantasy football. So just shift the expectations on the ceiling for Josh Downs unless he gets some touchdown luck or maybe has a burst in the yards after catch, because I don't necessarily see his average depth of target increasing big, just the profile of player that he is. So continuing to round out this room, I think the beauty of it is you have those pretty clear top 2 guys, right? With Downs and Pittman, you can attach to that. But looking at the next guys, Alec Pierce was like a wind sprint king last year. He was running deep routes and getting nothing out of it all year. And then we look at AD Mitchell, the rookie coming in with the big talent profile, Of course, we remember he didn't have a whole bunch of college analytics that we loved coming in and not a bunch of compilation of stats, but an intriguing profile nonetheless. So if you're taking one of these other two wide receivers to be a dart throw on the bottom of your bench, Frank, who's it going to be? Alec Pierce or is it going to be AD Mitchell?
Well, I would say 80 Mitchell because you look at the fantasy points data that I've seen on Twitter often. His Mitchell's separation score is good. Maybe he gets going in year two. Mitchell does. But on the other hand, I know Pierce is like a win sprint type, but he has these random blow up games. 125 yards against the Texans, 134 against the Jags, 122 against the Giants. Those three games were spike weeks that would have likely hit your roster in best ball. So I'm fine with either or of these receivers, but only in a best ball league. If it's a redraft league, I'd rather go with Mitchell because maybe he can evolve into that more
Yeah.
bankable type of receiver that you could feel comfortable starting. Because in a redraft league, when can you feel comfortable starting Pierce? Like after his 134 yards, one touchdown game, he had 0 yards, then 15, 11. Like it's really, you're going to be
Yeah.
pulling your hair out. And it's not like you'll just park Pierce in your lineup so that you get those games. So best ball only for Pierce. Mitchell has more of a chance to become redraft relevant.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well put there because Pierce, you're only putting him in your flex spot if you went down big after the Thursday nighter and you need a guy who can give you a 25-point performance, right? Otherwise, there's no way you're pulling that trigger. AD Mitchell is different because I think his path essentially is to replace Alec Pierce. So he has to take on all the routes that Alec Pierce was taking. But if you look at that, I think the ceiling could be a lot bigger because on what he ran in 2024, along with the separation stuff, he was top 20 in targets per route. So he was earning targets while he was out there. Obviously, that separation is a big piece of that, but over a quarter of his routes saw a target for AD Mitchell. And I think that's pretty sick if he can get in more of a full time role in those three wide sets. So remains to be seen, but pretty clear higher ceiling, potentially more path to building weekly consistency for AD Mitchell, which is, I think, what you were getting at with that Alec Pierce comparison there, too, Frank. So well put. I think the biggest question and the elephant in this room is it all going to suck no matter what based on this quarterback situation, Frank?
I don't think it's gonna stuck. It's gonna suck because Shane Steichen, despite his recent criticism, he's still a pretty good coach. And we talked about it on an earlier episode. The Colts aren't as much of a dumpster fire as public
That's
perception.
right.
Like they weren't that far out of the playoffs. The Colts, so I think you can get value out of this room. And like I said, they both go outside the top 50, Pittman and Downs at their positions. And then Mitchell and Pierce are even cheaper. So a good value team to look at.
Yeah, cheap as hell stacks too. And then with AD Mitchell and Alec Pierce, even if you took both of them super late in your draft, you know you have the deep wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. So I think that's very well put, Frank. And we are going to move on and talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We've talked a little bit about him with Emeka Egbuka coming in there. Obviously, one of my biggest losers from the draft on that episode was Jalen McMillan. But I think it's interesting because we see Mike Evans coming back, obviously trying to get that big season again, like he's had every year of his career. Chris Godwin had that massive injury last year after being one of the top fantasy wide receivers. He's going to be looking to continue where he left off. Reports that I read yesterday, Frank, said that he is looking like he's hopeful for week one, which I think is an incredible recovery after dislocating his ankle. I think it was like week 8 or something like that. So good for him. We love Chris Godwin. And then we got these young guys in McMillan and Egbuka, with Egbuka as the 19th overall pick. McMillan was drafted last year, I think 4th round, but he did come up with 8 touchdowns as a rookie. So exceeded expectations there. Like, if we look at these guys, the two younger guys, let's start with them, Egbuka and McMillan. Are they both longer term plays, or are we looking to rely on one of them in 2025, Frank, with Baker and the Bucs high powered offense?
Well, with Egbuka, you like his profile more for a potential big win with his upside. You know, he could be that volume target earner. He could win in the slot. And maybe if Chris Godwin, despite returning, is not at full form, maybe there's a path for Egbuka to carve out a larger role. So I think he's more of the swing for the fence play among the younger receivers on the Bucs, whereas Jalen McMillan feels like a best ball only type where you're hoping to snag a couple spike weeks. Maybe you luck into a situation where McMillan's forced in an increased role due to injury to either Evans or Godwin. So that's the way I look at McMillan more, whereas Egbuka, you're swinging for the fences.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about those slot guys, I think, like, for me, the addition of Emeka Egbuka made it so that Jalen McMillan is only gonna be getting slot targets on this team, and it's interesting to look at the usage from last year because Jalen McMillan ran 73% of his routes from out wide, Frank. I think if I asked you how much did he play out wide, you would probably have said a lot lower than that. He only ran 9 fewer wide routes than Mike Evans, Jalen McMillan did. So that was pretty crazy to see when I looked it up. But the problem was that he sucked on all of them. He was really bad from out wide. Aside from scoring some touchdowns, which is, the bread and butter of his game last year, he had 1.07 yards per route run from outside versus 2.09 from the slot. So I think it's pretty clear that he is best suited to play in the slot. Whether they do that or not remains to be seen. But Egbuka is a little bit different because he can play outside, he can play inside. And so I think he's going to be that third wide receiver in year one. And Baker last year threw the second most pass attempts, and he had the second most yards and the most touchdowns from 3 wide receiver sets in 2024. So the one kicker here is that Liam Cohen is gone. The offensive coordinator has gone to Jacksonville, but the new offensive coordinator, Josh Grizzard, is an internal promotion. So that does bode well for them continuing some of the things that they did have last year. So I have grown more and more and more bullish on Emeka Egbuka as the weeks have gone by since the draft. And unfortunately, as somebody who is a big fan of Jalen McMillan, I've started to fade him quite a bit to where, yeah, in Dynasty, I'm holding him, hoping that long term, maybe he can carve out that slot role, being a low upside slot role. But that's about the hopes that I have for Jalen McMillan without a couple of injuries. So unfortunate scenes there for him. Really fortunate for Egbuka. What do we think about the old guard here? So Mike Evans, do you think he comes in and he has that target hog season where he gets another 1K year and everything is status quo for Mike Evans? So let's start with him.
I think the good thing with Mike Evans, as with all the Bucs receivers, this is a pass-heavy offense. Like you said, an in-house replacement for Liam Cohen, bringing continuity to the offense. Baker Mayfield, ever since he's joined the Bucs, he's performed at a high level. So the passing game should be quite good. So you want to attach yourself and invest in this passing game, whether it's Mike Evans, whether it's Chris Godwin. So start going to your point about Evans. I mean, he's been Mr. Consistency. I know he's pricey, the most expensive of the bunch. So maybe that makes me less into Evans compared to the others, but I'm still totally down with him as a pick. Touchdown machine, pass heavy offense, chemistry with the quarterback, continuity and play calling despite a change at offensive coordinator. The Bucs offense is one of the most fun in fantasy, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Mike Evans, to your point, back of the third round in underdog drafts right now. Chris Godwin going at pick 64. So that's the front of the sixth round. So decent value on a high powered offense. I think it's interesting too, because we really are kind of staking our claim to Baker Mayfield when we are doing that as well, because I think last year was a fantastic season for him. 41 touchdowns, 4,500. He had 4,500 passing yards on the button, exactly 4,500, which I thought is kind of fun. Um, and so I think if we want him to hold up these 3 guys now with Egbuka coming in, he's going to have to keep doing that. Now, I ask you, Frank, are you confident that Baker can keep that part rolling of this offense? Because I think that was the linchpin to all of the last year's success.
Yeah, I think Baker Mayfield could definitely still be, high quality, high volume passer. In terms of fantasy, I don't like paying the premium for the pocket QB because a lot could go wrong, and then I could just wait a couple rounds and go with Dak Prescott, who now has George Pickens and an improved offensive line. But that doesn't mean I don't think Baker can still finish in the top 10 or even, 6, 7, 8 range. I just don't want to pay that premium price. Although a counterpoint to that could be, like we just said, in-house replacement at play caller. They drafted a
Yeah,
stud receiver in the first round. So he's got a great supporting cast, Baker Mayfield. So maybe there's just a new him, and you could just forget about everything he did prior to joining the Bucs. And this is Baker Mayfield. We need to consider him as like a more affordable Joe Burrow, maybe. So
maybe.
that's the counter. But My personal strategy will be to not pay the premium for a pocket QB like this and go with the likes of Dak and others.
Yeah, totally. He's going in underdog drafts ahead of Bo Nix, ahead of Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Dak, all these guys. And so for me, I think the price of Baker Mayfield going after Patrick Mahomes, he's only going 10 picks after Patrick Mahomes, at pick 92, where Mahomes goes at 84. So for me, I think that doesn't account for any of the downside or regression that we could see from Baker. So I'm in the same boat as you, where I'm going to fade that price a little bit because there's similar options in a much better range of the draft. Oh, Frank, I've kind of been dreading this team. I've been kind of dreading this team to unpack, and that's the Green Bay Packers. Their wide receiver room seems to have been a mess since, I was in the womb potentially. Maybe not so much. They used to have those Jordy and Donald Driver years, but man, the last few years feel like they have dragged on with us trying to attach to a ceiling option here. And I feel like it just has not come. We got Christian Watson was supposed to be that guy, right? He's supposed to be that downfield, big play merchant. Obviously, he got injured last year. He's going to miss a big chunk of this season. And even previous to that, that wasn't panning out with him being a target getter that gives us that upside. Jayden Reed, I love him, but I talked about him previously, that slot only guy, similar to Josh Downs, but even worse. He only had 4 routes in those 12 personnel formations and 0 targets on them. So he is not getting on the field when they are in heavier sets, and they are a run heavy team. Jordan Love was in the top half of quarterbacks for pass attempts out of those formations. So I just don't know what to make of these guys, Frank. I didn't intend to go on a little dialogue as we got in there, but I don't think they have any alpha or like anyone who's going to come in and command these targets. So who do you think is going to be their leading target getter, not necessarily a commander?
Yeah, so I agree with you that there's no alpha on this Packers group, but that doesn't mean we can't find value. And the value pick I see here is Jayden Reed because the allure with Reed has kind of worn off. The shine has worn off after that really terrible second half where he was, in fantasy, he was like receiver 50-ish. And like you said,
Yeah.
Reed was barely used in 3 receiver sets. Well, now he's more affordable, Reed is, because the Packers used the first rounder on a receiver and getting Golden. Also, here's something to consider. Jordan Love played through injuries last year. So I posed the question on Twitter, what if the Packers went so extremely run heavy to kind of accommodate Love, who was playing through injury and couldn't do as much as usual? So they wanted to hide him a little bit and make him more of a game manager. And if you go by that theory, then because like previous year, they weren't that run heavy. Like Love was much better in fantasy. The passing game was more exciting. So if Love is healthy, the Packers could return to at least more passing volume, not this extreme run heavy type of offense. And that could mean maybe they use a little more 3 receivers, or maybe Reed is on the field a little more just because of that. Then of course, maybe there you have to always leave the outside chance that perhaps LaFleur starts to realize like, hey, this is one of my best playmakers. Maybe I should give him a little more opportunities in 2 receiver sets. That's less likely because we got to believe that till we see it. But the option's still on the table. So my main takeaway here is going after Reed because I think Love should be better after being healthier this year since he played through injury last year. And Reed is more of the pivot from the more flashy rookie in Golden. And yeah, Reed goes later than he did last year. So it's that post hype type of pick. Not to say he's going to develop into a receiver 1 in fantasy, but as that upside receiver 3 that you can plug in here and there and give you depth in redraft or give you spike weeks in best ball. I like going with Jayden Reed.
Yeah, he seems like just the most bankable option, right? And I've already talked about how I love Jayden Reed, so I'm not hiding anything there, but just the most bankable from the fact that he is going to be getting peppered with targets. I think I might disagree in the fact that they'll go more pass heavy just because I think like the core of LaFleur's offense is through the run game. Lots of those 2 wide receiver sets with Kraft and Musgrave. And that's why Jayden Reed doesn't necessarily get on the field there. But yeah, I think it's interesting because at the same ADP, I'm definitely going Jayden Reed over Matthew Golden. Didn't love the prospect coming out, and I could get burned on that. I think we all could. There's a lot of people fading Matthew Golden. We understand that there is some potential upside there, but it didn't show itself that often in college, and the underlying metrics reflected that as well. So I personally thought he was a bit overdrafted there, but to each their own. So if people like them some Matthew Golden and they would like to take him over Jayden Reed, the beauty is they are exactly the same ADP, with Golden at 77 and Jayden Reed at 77.4 on Underdog. So it's pretty much pick your poison, and you're not having to, lose any value on either of these guys. So personal preference, really.
Yeah. Quick clarification. I don't mean that the Packers will suddenly become more pass heavy, like in the top half of the league in passing volume. I just meant passing more than what they showed last year. So like they do love to run the ball, no doubt, with Matt LaFleur, but I think it was to an extreme level in the second half last year, and I don't think it will be as pronounced this time around with Love healthier. They'll still be run heavy overall in terms of your ranking, pass rate above expectation, but I think they'll pass more than they did in that second half of last year.
Yeah, it was kind of like a last year they were 6th in rush attempts, but the previous season they were outside the top 15. So somewhere in the middle is probably where they will land too. Yeah, and I think Jordan Love can kind of aid them in going either way, right? Because he's mobile, so he can kind of help them in the run game, but he also has a cannon of an arm, so he can help them if they decide that some games they want to use the passing game a little bit more. So what about these next 2 guys, Doubs and Wicks? And we're not necessarily going to talk about Christian Watson right now because we don't know when he's going to come back. We don't know what it's going to look like. But Doubs and Wicks, like, a lot of people got on the Dontayvion Wicks train. They loved him. They gassed him way up, and they got way burned on that. I'm really thankful I didn't bite on that one. Doubs, nobody really invests in him, but he's just like perennially pesky. You know what I mean? Like, he just feels like the clogger who takes so much target work that he limits everybody else's upside. And he doesn't offer you anything great. He's just one of those ho-hum possession receivers, but they seem to like him a lot to give him a lot of targets. Do you think any of these guys are viable though?
What I like about Dobbs is, like you said, he has the trust of the coaching staff and he's on the field a lot. So in best ball, at the end of your draft, rounding out your receiver room, having a player like that who's always on the field, like sometimes he can have that random spike week, like an Alec Pierce. So Dobbs makes sense in that kind of scenario. Whereas like AD Mitchell and Indy, where Dobbs is like the Pierce, Wicks can be like the Mitchell, and that maybe can evolve into more of a redraft relevant type of player because I think there's more upside in Wicks overall. But in building that receiver room, having those players who are on the field often and that could keep you afloat each week in best ball makes sense. So that's how I view Dobbs. And as for Golden, he's the wild card. I didn't really mention him, so I want to briefly touch on him. Like you said, Golden goes at the same price as Reed, which makes me prefer Reed a little bit just because I think you're getting a discount with Reed. But Golden can absolutely, perform well. Like, think back to the Ravens. I remember when they drafted Zay Flowers in round 1. That offseason in fantasy football drafts, people were still clinging on to Rashad Bateman as potentially still being the top receiver on the Ravens. And if I'm not mistaken, he maybe even went a little higher than Flowers, or they were similar. They weren't too far off in cost that year.
Yeah.
And that's because some people weren't as high on Flowers as the prospect, and he still proved them wrong and outperformed Bateman and was the right pick. So that could absolutely happen with Golden. But in terms of who I'm going to ride with, it's going to be Jayden Reed.
Yeah, it's interesting. As we're talking, like, there's part of me that's almost thinking that for me, Golden might be the play a little bit because we kind of know what we were getting with Jayden Reed, right? We know that he can bring some upside and after the catch ability, maybe score a little bit of touchdowns. And I'm just kind of putting it out there. I'm not sure that I'm stamped on this take just yet, but like, Golden offers that uncertainty that could give us the upside that Jayden Reed hasn't given us yet, right? And so I wonder if, like, at that price, you're almost just re-rolling on Jayden Reed Obviously, it's a best ball draft, not a dynasty draft, so re-rolling isn't quite what you're doing. But you know what I mean? You're just taking another shot on a Packers wide receiver that could give us what we thought we got or we're going to get out of Jayden Reed. So I think that's what I might have to think about. And maybe I'm rising a little bit on Matthew Golden, despite my thoughts on him as the prospect previously. But I think, again, some of this comes down to Doubs not taking a ton of targets. Like, I think last year he had like 90 targets or something like that, or the year before, maybe he had 95 or something like that. And if he's taking that much work, it hurts the other guys. But if these guys can supplant Doubs, and maybe Golden is playing out of the X and as that outside wide receiver on the field all the time too, to where he can realize more than what Jayden Reed. I'm going to dig into that one. So stay tuned because I might put some stuff out on the Substack if I dig into that Packers situation and make a firm stance, or on the socials through True North FFB. Go give us a follow.
Yeah, you could even tell yourself a story that the Packers for years haven't taken a receiver in the first round, and now they
Yeah.
finally did. So maybe that highlights the Packers' interest in Golden as a player. Maybe that proves that they have big plans for him. You can really paint an argument in that way. So yeah, as we're talking it through, we're talking ourselves into Golden as well as worth a dart throw.
Totally. And like that whole, like, I might be telling myself a story is probably the only reason why I haven't stamped this claim just yet. And I want to dig into a little bit more because yeah, it's easy to tell ourselves these stories and buy into them in the moment. But yeah, I don't mind
It's
that,
good.
Frank.
It's good to look at all angles of a
Yeah.
situation and how it could play out. Like maybe in one draft, like Golden gets taken right at cost, but and you're not that into him, you weren't looking at Golden that round. But maybe in another draft that you're in, Golden has fallen around past ADP. Maybe you don't totally love Golden, but then you think, hey, okay, I'm getting him cheaper. They took him first round. The Packers never really take receivers first round. Maybe so you can start to convince
Hmm.
yourself there and play it differently depending on the draft that you have. You don't have to always be so gung ho on certain players and only prioritizing them. You could play it out differently.
And if we think about kind of on top of that, the story that we've already been telling, who's more likely to give you the big play touchdowns more consistently? I would say maybe Matthew Golden. Um, I think maybe the target volume probably goes towards Jayden Reed, but I think Matthew Golden profiles to be a higher upside player on less volume than Jayden Reed, maybe. So we're spinning that web for sure. We're spinning that web. I'm curious to hear what the listeners think. So drop a comment and let us know if you prefer Matthew Golden or Jayden Reed. If any of our stances on these guys changed your tune or anything, or if you have a case to be made to change ours. I love that. I love that. Oh, another one that I dreaded coming into, Frank. This one's awful. The Kansas City Chiefs, man. How do we make sense of this wide receiver room? We've got Xavier Worthy showed some promise as a rookie. Rashee Rice has showed promise all around, but has also showed some knuckleheadedness. Hollywood Brown is there for a full season, a full training camp this year with the ability to get some chemistry with Patrick Mahomes. And reports are thus far that Hollywood Brown has looked good there. So what do we make of this wide receiver room? Because I think in order to see results from all of them, this offense is going to have to shift away from Travis Kelce getting a bunch of targets and be more of a wide receiver centric offense, which they haven't necessarily been since the Tyreek Hill days, Frank. So do you have a take on how to make sense of this KC room? Let's kind of chat it out.
Well, to start off, Rashee Rice is I've seen on Twitter a lot of people hyping him up because Rice has performed like a receiver one when healthy, like in his second half of rookie year and parts of last season as that volume target earner over the slot. But I think that Rice is a little bit overpriced going second or third round. It's a lot of confidence that Rice will immediately reassume his previous role. I know we tend to look at receiver talent once they show they could earn targets. It's always like that, but he's a lower ADOT type of target. Xavier Worthy came on down the stretch. Worthy was taken in the first round. Maybe Worthy started to really establish himself in the pecking order. There, for me, there's a chance that Worthy can emerge as the top receiver here over Rice, or at least cold number ones. And so I think Rice is a little bit overpriced, especially coming off the injury. Even though it wasn't a torn ACL, still a significant knee injury. Even though there's positive reports on Rice, we can always take team reports with a grain of salt. Sometimes they exaggerate. So we need to see it first. And I just feel like Rice is too expensive for me now. I'd rather look elsewhere. You probably the most likely scenario is Mahomes spreads the ball around a lot. These three eat into each other. They'll have their spike weeks. You want to build KC stacks and best ball, you go with it. I just would rather pay for the more affordable Worthy than Rashee Rice.
Yeah, and even to me, to an extent, Hollywood Brown has, maybe 10% less shot at being a top target getter on this team. He's a good receiver, and he has shown us flashes of being a good receiver before. Maybe not the highest volume guy. We don't necessarily want him to be taking 140 targets necessarily, because might be some breakdown happening there. But if he gets like 90 to 100 targets, I would not be super surprised about that. And I think, just to your point, we've kind of always wanted to take the cheaper option in this offense, because looking at the last couple of years, I took a look at like their top wide receiver on a per game basis over the last 4 years. And it's like last year was good for Rashee. He averaged 16.2 points per game, which would have been good enough for wide receiver 15, or at the time was wide receiver 15. No, good enough on the season to be wide receiver 15, but that's only across 4 games, Frank. So for me, it's really hard to attach to that sample size. The previous season in 2023, Rashee was their highest totaling wide receiver per game, 13.3 fantasy points, wide receiver 29. Previous to that, obviously a messier room, but it was Juju with 11.7 points per game, wide receiver 36. And then 2021 was Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 6 at 17.5. So since Tyreek Hill, it has been mixed, mostly not great results for the top target getter on the Chiefs. And so I fade to the cheapest guy. And to me, I might even be going a step further than just fading to Xavier Worthy and fading to Marquise Hollywood Brown. So I think that's where I kind of sit. It's not to say these guys aren't good. Like, I like Xavier Worthy. I like the upside he presents. I just think if we're talking value propositions, Hollywood presents almost as much as these other guys. Now, he wasn't a first round pick like Xavier Worthy. So I think Xavier Worthy has that extended leash where that's concerned, but the cost on these guys is way, way different. So that's what I'm taking into account.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen Brown produce before, so it's worth a shot. Less opportunity cost where Brown goes in drafts, so I like it. One thing I want to note is that there's a chance, like, okay, Worthy reminds me a little bit of Jalen Waddle as a rookie. So in the sense that Waddle had all these like lower ADOT targets in the season, and then we saw Worthy get that in the second half of last season. And then Waddle in year two became more of what we thought he'd be, as that explosive deep play threat. My point is, we could see the same happen with Worthy. Like, maybe now that Rice is back, they start to get Worthy going and cooking and taking the top off opposing defenses like we thought he would do as a rookie. And that can, make him like more of a Jameson Williams type of receiver that can help you in best ball. So just a little thought I had in that we can't just assume that Worthy will be that, you know, underneath manufactured touch type of receiver, because like it evolves over time, like with the Jalen Waddle example.
Yeah, and some of that from last year might have been out of necessity for Xavier Worthy, whereas this year, if Rashee is operating underneath at the clip that he previously was, Xavier Worthy is going to have to win over top to see the production that he probably wants, that the team probably wants, and that of course we want too. So, yeah, I think there is upside to be had, but it's just a wide receiver that I've predominantly or a wide receiver room that I've predominantly hesitated on, because it never really shakes out the way we want it to. Shout out to Jalen Royals as a deep, 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 deep dynasty stash. Just he was drafted by the Chiefs. I really liked him as a prospect. Didn't love the landing spot for the short term, obviously, but maybe long term he can get some work in there. Just a little shout out. Okay. We're going to have a little Canadian content in this one, Frank, because we're going to the Buffalo Bills, and they brought over one Josh Palmer from the Chargers. Now, this isn't your bang pots and pans. We got ourselves a wide receiver one signing. But if we're looking at what the Bills are doing, it seems like they are continuing the wide receiver by committee approach. Khalil Shakir, predominantly the slot guy, feels like he's going to continue to be the most targeted as he was last season, but it's really kind of anyone's guess, right? We got Keon Coleman, a massive flop in year one. I personally don't think he's going to bounce back. Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore were both brought in this season, and they both bring a little bit of unrealized potential. Now they're with a Josh Allen quarterbacked team, so their situations have gotten much better. But as we try to look through the weeds here, Frank, who give me two guys that you would target, like maybe your two favorite targets out of those four.
For the Bills, despite your concerns with Keon Coleman, like he did flop 556 yards, 4 touchdowns it was in 13 games, but he's a second rounder, first pick of the second round, I might add. Big bodied receiver, 6'4", 215. I feel like he's the swing for the fences, Coleman.
That's fair.
If you're trying to have a larger win in this Bills receiver room,
Mhm.
you can target Coleman, and he's cheap. Post hype, disappointing rookie year. That's the type of profile sometimes I like to target, just because you get that reduced cost. And if I pick my other, it'd be Khalil Shakir, but you know, there's not like so much upside with him. It's not like he's gonna really get peppered with targets because, as you mentioned, the Bills have this receiver by committee and run heavy approach. So I feel like what we've seen from Shakir is probably the best of what we'll get. So he's more of like, let's say I'm building a team, and for example, in best ball, and I went running back heavy, and I'm rounding out my receiver room. I need more projectable type of production rather than hoping for upside. Shakir would make sense in that case. Whereas if I'm filling out the bottom parts of my receiver room, I'm swinging for more fences. I'm going Keon Coleman. But of course, Shakir is more preferred in full PPR. So from a redraft standpoint, I would only look at him in that type of format.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good take on it there because as much as I don't like Keon Coleman, if you're gonna ask me who is the guy that could project to get 10 pass or receiving touchdowns from Josh Allen, I'd probably say Keon Coleman with that big body. He did come in very raw, so maybe he has done some work on that. So I'll give you that for sure, Frank. I think some of my prospect scouting layover is happening where I haven't necessarily looked into it to be able to adjust on Keon Coleman. So I will take that one back and look at it for sure. But I think I'm taking shots on Palmer and Moore personally. Like, I don't think Shakir is very high upside, and I don't know if they'll necessarily be that high upside either. But I think this team is kind of aching for somebody else alongside Shakir. And sure, they might want to give Keon Coleman the first couple cracks because they spent that draft capital. But I kind of think that Elijah Moore and Josh Palmer are better. I think Josh Palmer definitely projects more as an outside receiver than does Elijah Moore. And I think that would fit better with Khalil Shakir as a tandem. So I'm very hopeful for Josh Palmer. Maybe a little bit of the Canadian bias just wants to see him do it. But I think he's a really talented player and he flashed quite a bit in spurts in Los Angeles with the Chargers. So I'm kind of hopeful he can get more role. And these two guys are both super free. So I'm willing to kind of take that shot. But it's kind of a preference thing because Keon Coleman's super cheap too. Khalil Shakir, considering the fact that he probably is the leading target getter, is a reasonable price as well. So I think these guys are fairly priced considering they're all attached to Josh Allen. I just might want to lean into kind of the unknown and what we haven't seen yet. Maybe similar to what we were talking about with Matthew Golden in terms of Elijah Moore and Josh Palmer. I almost called him Jordan Palmer. I almost said I had Jordan and Trey Palmer both flash through my head as I was trying to figure out his first name, but we got there. We got there.
I think the beauty of the fact that the Bills have that receiver by committee is that you can take any of these guys as you're building a Bills stack on best ball. Even Mac Collins had an 86-yard game and a 57-yard and a touchdown game. So they can give you that couple usable weeks to as your last receiver on your bench with upside for more, of course, with Palmer and Elijah Moore because they're both better than Matt Collins in that example. So yeah, the point is if you're building a bill stack, you got Josh Allen, you maybe missed out on Khalil Shakir, and you can just double up on, you know, Coleman, Palmer, Moore, or even all three of them to really invest in this offense if you choose to.
Yeah, man. And I was surprised when I looked at this to see that last year they gave the fourth most targets to wide receivers and had the fourth most receiving yards to wide receivers. It was just very, very spread out. So I think there's going to be some pie to eat. And it's just all about these guys getting their hands dirty and getting in there. Okay, Frank, we're going to talk some rapid fire. This was pretty fun last week where we just fired some stuff off, gave a couple sentences, and kind of let her ride. I got a bunch in here because, like I said at the top, there are a lot more ambiguous wide receiver rooms than we had time to fully unpack. So I'm just going to fire some at you. You're going to give me your stance or your take on what you think these guys can be, and I'll give you a rebuttal if I disagree or whatever, and we'll just roll through like that, my man. You ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, looking at the Titans, Cam Ward coming in. Calvin Ridley has, of course, been a strong producer at the wide receiver position. Calvin Ridley can be a top 15 wide receiver in 2025.
I think there's upside for Calvin Ridley to do that. We've seen some spike weeks, especially down the stretch. You look at the Titans receiver room, it's quite barren outside of Ridley, so you could totally dominate targets. But I think more likely you're looking at that boomer bust, 20 to 26 range type of receiver who can get you some really high ceiling games and some low floor ones as the Titans struggle. But obviously there's upside that if Cam Ward is better than everyone thinks, or gets to his potential earlier than everyone thinks, Ridley obviously gets that QB upgrade. So he's worth a look. Uh, I think there is that ceiling for him of maybe 15, though, not like getting to 13, 8, that kind of range, just
Yeah,
in the lower end of top 15. I think there's upside for that for Ridley.
totally. I think for me, I'm extremely happy with him as the wide receiver 3 on my roster in season long. I'm hopeful, but not as optimistic with him as the wide receiver 2 on my roster, and I don't want him as the wide receiver 1 on my roster. But the beauty is we know he's going to stack volume because there's not many other people to throw to in that offense of Tennessee. Okay, Jerry Jeudy, massive season last year, Frank, and now he's with the Browns. We don't really know who's going to win that quarterback competition. At the very least, it'll be Joe Flacco, potentially Shadur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, Kenny Pickett. Who knows? But Jerry Jeudy, do you think he maintains some of that production we saw last year? Remember, that production was with one Jameis Winston, a lot of it. So we have to take that into account. Are you fading Jeudy off of last year, or are you targeting him off of that?
Well, to start off, I wouldn't say I'd be fading Jeudy just because Judy's cost hasn't really risen. Like it's risen compared to last year, but it's not like it's prohibitive now that you're like, oh, this is too expensive. Like Judy's still quite affordable. So I can't really say I'd fade Judy, but with that said, I don't see similar production this year for Judy. I believe the Browns will try to run the football more. Like you said, that hot stretch for Judy was with Jameis Winston. I think Cleveland would be wise to see what they have with one of their young quarterbacks, and my bet it would be Shadur Sanders rather than just trotting out Joe Flacco. And if Sanders is starting, he's a rookie. They want to play it conservatively with him, run the ball more. It's unlikely you see those video game numbers we saw down the stretch from Judy. So I don't think he'll do what he did last year, but that doesn't mean I'd fade. If it's best ball, you want to maybe people will steer clear because of the rookie QB, but he's not that expensive, so his price is fine.
Yeah, I think to me it projects to be Shadur or Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback. And I think both of those guys can distribute adequately to Jerry Jeudy. Similar to Ridley, he's going to be the hog on this team. And to your point as well, he is kind of like a back of the sixth round pick, back of the top of the seventh. For the wide receiver 1 on a team, I think that's completely reasonable value as the wide receiver 2 or 3 on fantasy rosters. I think that's really nice. So I'm with you on that. I'm not like he's a really nice value at cost right now. He's not a big win on that. He's not a big loss on that as of yet, but we monitor that draft or that ADP, of course. Jameson Williams, you mentioned him earlier, Frank, and I am scared. As much as I love Jameson Williams, I am scared. He is steaming up into like wide receiver 2 prices right now, and I cannot jump on that train. How about you?
Well, Jameson Williams, I could see the case because he's so explosive. The offense is great. The hope is that he can have that double digit touchdown, like 1,300 yards a year. And in best ball, he could have the highs could be really high. So that could make him more valuable in that format. Maybe in redraft, Jameson Williams won't go as high. So I'm okay with it, but yeah, I get your point because obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown is the target earner there, the alpha. The Lions are still run heavy, so that's the thing. But there could be a take. It could be a case where Jameson's just such an explosive talent that he still provides value at that cost. But we should note, with Ben Johnson gone, with Frank Ragnow retiring, maybe the offense takes a step back, and maybe that makes them have to check it down a little more to Amon-Ra or Gibbs rather than have time to have those explosive plays for Jameson. So I think if the offense regresses, it helps Amon-Ra and Gibbs more than it does Jameson. Because, like I said, more check downs, get the ball out of Goff's hands quicker, especially if the pass protection regresses with the downgraded offensive line. But overall, I'm okay with Williams' price just because it's a swing for the fence and his profile sets up nicely for the best ball type of format.
Yeah, yeah, he's really fun. I'll give him that, but I am pretty concerned about that Lions offensive regression as well. Jared Goff specifically, his most of his career has been spent in a Sean McVay or a Ben Johnson offense, and the one year that he wasn't was his first year with the Lions, and that's his only season under 3,500 yards, only season under 20 touchdowns. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's 100% what's going to happen with the new offensive coordinator John Morton, but not having Ben Johnson is concerning for me with the efficiency they provided last year. And I think Jameson Williams specifically is kind of an efficiency driven wideout. And so if there's a drop in that, I'm not necessarily buying in. But I love him. I love him. We talked a bunch about the Bears wide receiver room a few episodes ago, Frank. So just who is the leading target getter in 2025?
For the Bears, it's going to be DJ Moore for me. That's my pick. I know a lot of people are like questioning Moore for last year's production. He didn't show the same kind of effort. But I hear a lot of you, including you love Roma Dunze, which is fine. But a lot of people are saying like they're giving him a pass of Dunze for his rookie season because of the play calling. Well, that means we should probably give DJ Moore a pass as well, and because it was a bad situation. We've seen Moore produce at a high level in the past. 1 year removed from an elite fantasy season, he's had a few 80 catch years. I think we'll continue to see DJ Moore be the top target in this Bears offense, where Odunze could be more of the deep threat type, and then maybe it'll take time for Luther Burden to get going. Although I don't mind taking a shot on Burden because he was handpicked
Yeah.
by this coaching staff. My preference is going with DJ Moore and just paying up for the proven commodity.
Yeah, I think Burden is definitely more of a year two proposition. I'm making the stance. I'm planting the flag in Roma Dunze. He's going to be the leading target getter for the Chicago Bears in 2025, and he is going to flirt with top 15 wide
Ooh.
receiver on the season this year. That's a bold prediction for me. Big fan of Rome in this offense with Ben Johnson. Let's go to the Chargers and talk about where another rookie wide receiver was drafted in Tre Harris. And my question is, how much does Tre Harris impact the upside of Ladd McConkey, which we saw last year?
I think Ladd McConkey's upside is more limited by the Chargers' preference to run the football and continuing to invest in their running backs, bringing in Najee Harris, bringing in Amari and Hampton. We saw the Chargers pass the ball more down the stretch, but that coincided with J.K. Dobbins being hurt, the running game really not being non-existent, so it was out of necessity. Whereas this year, as you've seen, their huge investment in running back, I think they'll have a really strong running game, and that's what Jim Harbaugh, that's what Greg Roman wants to do. So that's not to say I don't think Ladd McConkey could finish as a top 10 fantasy receiver. It just acknowledging the risks that are present and taking, albeit a talented receiver, but he's like second round right now. So those are the risks with McConkey. But I don't think Tre Harris would hurt him too much. I think McConkey will still be the alpha in this offense. Maybe if Harris is good, it could help the offense overall. It could help with McConkey's efficiency. But the main point is that the run heavy tendencies of the Chargers is what concerns me more for McConkey's value than Tre Harris's emergence.
Yeah, I've been in that camp since before they drafted Tre Harris, and it sounds like maybe you have too. Um, Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see because Tre Harris to me also doesn't necessarily limit one Ladd McConkey, but I think Quentin Johnson potentially could if he still has something to say about these targets. I think Tre Harris projects to replace one Quentin Johnston, but if Quentin Johnston's still getting all of that work, then it's going to be trouble for Tre Harris in year one. Whereas I think Ladd McConkey, I worry that last year was maybe the best year we're going to see out of him. You know what I mean? Like getting all those touchdowns, getting all those yards after the catch. Maybe not the best year we're ever going to see out of him, but I have a hard time seeing him as a perennial top 10 fantasy producer despite him being right on that edge last year.
Yeah, I get that, but he just has that profile where he's just earning a lot of targets. We saw it down the stretch, and he could be that. He could become like that Amon-Ra St. Brown type for the Chargers.
Yeah.
It's like the Lions are run heavy, and St. Brown still produces. So that's a counterpoint to that. But yeah, I'm a little cautious with taking McConkey second round.
Mm-hmm.
You can get Derrick Henry falls second round, Devon Achane falls second round, Jonathan Taylor is there. There's a lot of good running backs, and I can just wait 9, 10, wait to the next round, try to get Jaxson Smith-Njigba, who
Mm-hmm.
has a similar type of skill set to McConkey, similarly in an offense that I think wants to shift more towards running the ball after bringing Clint Kubiak and investing in the offensive line in the Seahawks. So it's all about saying, like, can I take this risk a little later with a similar
Yeah.
type of skill set? And I think that's a good way to look at your fantasy football drafts. Like, I can take a running back in round 2, and maybe JSN falls to me in round 3. So that's a way to look at it. Nothing against McConkey as a player. I've seen some interesting takes. The guys at Underdog, Josh Norris and Hayden Winks, really bullish on McConkey. I saw the great content they put out. Not to say I agree, not to say I disagree, but it's just interesting that respected minds have that view of McConkey. So these are things to consider as
Yeah.
well. But overall, personally, I'm probably looking at a running back there, and like I said, and trying for JSN in round 3.
Yeah. You mentioned JSN. So let's look at the Seahawks real quick. Do you think he was the wide receiver 6 last year in PPR format? So that's massive upside for him. Do you think he can keep that rolling with the insertion of Cooper Kupp in to this wide receiver room? Cooper Kupp obviously much different than DK Metcalf. Do you think JSN's still going to be on that level? Or are we going to have to wait maybe until Cooper Kupp leaves after a couple seasons?
I think JSN could be on that level because, he was doing that with DK Metcalf there last year. And this version of Cooper Kupp is a downgrade from DK Metcalf. Cooper Kupp really showed signs of decline in the second half last season. I wasn't a huge fan of that signing, to be honest, Cooper Kupp. I think he's just going to be a supporting piece, and this will be the JSN show as they try to run the ball with Kenneth Walker sprinkled in with Charbonnet. So I think JSN could do it. Like Darnold, I prefer Geno Smith over Darnold a little bit. It's not like a huge downgrade, and I could totally be wrong there. It could be Darnold as a better one. I mean, it's debatable who's the better quarterback. So I don't think we have to be too concerned there. And, the new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, showed some promise last year. Remember the early season with the Saints? Derek Carr was playing
Yeah, we like
well.
Coobs.
Olave, Rashid Shaheed, they were dropping bombs. So I mean, you could be a bit encouraged there with that hiring. JSN did his best work in the second half last year, came on just like McConkey. I think JSN could keep it rolling, and he looks like a more palatable type of pick in terms of cost than McConkey does. Like, if last I checked, I'm pretty sure it's like 8 pick difference, something like that, on Underdog between McConkey and JSN.
Yeah, Ladd goes at 18. JSN goes at 30. So it's been a
Oh, okay, there
spread.
you go.
Yeah,
So full round
same at
later. Not to say JSN is better than McConkey. McConkey may be better. He probably is because he did it as a rookie, and JSN took more time to get rolling. But is he a full round better, McConkey? So that's the way I look at it, and
yeah.
prefer to look at JSN due to cost.
Okay, Frank, I'm gonna give you 2 more because I got kids freaking out there, throwing shit. It's getting crazy, so we got to ride this bad boy out. But I would not be able to leave without asking you about your boys, of course. Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. Terry was magnificent last season. Is Deebo going to ruin that for all of us, or are they going to be able to coincide? I know they're way different and they succeed way different, but is this team going to have kind of the volume and the distribution to get them both to their end goal in these different ways?
Well, for one, I like the Deebo Samuel signing for the Commanders because I think his skill set fits in nicely with a dual threat like Jayden Daniels. They can just manufacture touches for Deebo, read option, things like that. A lot of presents new opportunities there. Not to say I'm that high on Deebo in fantasy though. So like I don't think Deebo could be a huge win at his price. He could just be like that solid contributor. I believe he goes like wide receiver 38, Deebo. I think it's more of like a solid pickup for real life. Um, as for McLaurin, I don't think Debo would affect him too much. I think McLaurin, this is who he is. He's going to get his 130 targets, 120 to 130. I think what will affect McLaurin is potential negative touchdown regression. Like, look at
Mm-hmm.
his seasons: 7 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 5, 5, 4, 13. So he almost, like, he doubled his previous career high almost in touchdowns, McLaurin did. Now, of course, the Washington offense is much better QB play. Obviously, it makes sense that McLaurin got more touchdowns, but not to this degree. That 13 could turn into 8. And
Mm-hmm.
even you look at McLaurin's yards, he had average 64.5 yards per game last year. That wasn't even his career high. Like he had 70.1 and he had 74.5. So my point is that he might still have that yardage, but fewer touchdowns. It's not like he blew up from a yardage perspective, McLaurin. So I think I'm a little out on McLaurin just because of the bump in cost due to touchdowns, but he's still going to produce. I don't think Debo would hurt his production, just more so touchdown variance.
Yeah. Still dope. Still dope. Terry McLaurin. Love him. Okay, last but not least is the 49ers because there is a shift there. We just talked about Debo moving on to the Commanders. Brandon Ayuk is still there despite what it seems like the community has completely forgotten about him. People are getting a little more excited about Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings these days. Good receivers. But do you think they can give you some of the production that we saw out of those Ayuk and Debo seasons? Like, do you think Pearsall and Jennings are those kind of players? Because I personally don't think they are. I think Jennings particularly is overachieving big time in a really good system. Pearsall remains to be seen as a rookie or a second year player coming off of his rookie season that had some turmoil. But what's your take on these kind of two new faces that are coming in to supplant Ayuk and Debo, even though Ayuk is still there and still could be the leading target getter if he's healthy?
Well, usually I don't like to really go after receivers coming off a torn ACL, but Ayuk is such a good price. Like he is, you can get him pretty late in your draft. I think seventh, eighth round last I checked, maybe fifth.
82nd pick. So that would be, yeah, right around the eighth
Yeah,
year. Yeah.
so Ayuk, like this is a guy that people love to get in the third round last year. You know, we're in 2025. Like players have surprised us with injury recoveries, looking better than we had expected. So it's not like Ayuk is going in the fifth, fourth, like eighth round.
Yeah,
It's worth
that's
a
cheap.
shot for a really talented player. Think about in the past, we'd be like, oh, what if Debo's out and Ayuk has that contingency upside? Well, now Debo's not on the team. Juwan Jennings showed well last year, but that's a late bloomer. What if is that going to be sticky? Is he going to keep that going? Sometimes these late bloomers just have these moments and then they go back to what they used to be. Ricky Pearsall had a couple good games, but still small sample. So for me, I like going for Brandon Ayuk there.
Mhm.
Very talented receiver. Everyone loved him. The shine is worn off the injury. Also, I've seen even some say on Twitter like concern about Ayuk's early season production prior to the injury. Well, we got to remember there was the trade rumors. Ayuk came to camp
Yeah.
late start for him. Sometimes it affects their early season production. So I don't really pay any attention to Ayuk's struggles before the injury. It just really comes down to his cost is fine, even with it coming off the serious injury. So why not take a shot on the most talented receiver here who's done it before?
who is the cheapest. He's 2 rounds cheaper, 2 full rounds cheaper than Jawan Jennings in underdogs right now, and a full round cheaper than Ricky Pearsall in underdog drafts right now. So it's all gas for Brandon Ayuk. He is so talented. I personally think that at health, he's one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. And I think
Mm-hmm.
he's shown that in flashes. He just needs to stay healthy. And I think they're going to need him to this year if Pearsall and Jennings can't kind of take on that mantle that he's not even leaving behind, but I guess Deebo leaves some behind as well. So, all right, Frank, and that does it for this episode of the True North Fantasy Pod. I think we got another nice one in the books, going through a lot of wide receiver situations that are out there. Please, if you listened, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us a like, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. It really helps drive kind of the traffic and keeps us motivated to keep it rolling. So love that. We do have the Substack as well. Been a little bit sparse as far as articles written there, but when they come up, we will put them up there. So we would love for you to get on there and at least give us one of the free subscriptions so you can get any of that content over on the Substack. Really appreciate that. So Frank, yeah, that's what I got. Of course, before I ride out, I always want to give you the chance to give some parting shots to the people.
Yeah, just to sum up the episode, players returning from serious injury, receivers, if the cost is fine, take a shot. Chris Godwin, receiver 3 in points per game last year. Now he's round 5. Reports are ready for week 1. Not like it was a torn ACL. You can throw a dart on that one. Ayuk even cheaper, and Deebo Samuel's not there anymore. So if the price is right, you make the move. And I hope you enjoyed listening. It was a great time talking through these receiving rooms.
Yep. So until next time, I am Travis Seal. That is Frank Amaranti, and we will see you next week. Peace.